are some instructions for the Photoshop Select, Mask, and Clone assignment. So in the assignment, there is a place for you to download the image that we're going to be modifying. So click on that link to download it. And then what we want to do is we want to file, open that in Photoshop. So I'm going to find this one. It's called photobomb.jpg. And one thing about Photoshop is there are a couple of things. The two main things that are the key to Photoshop are selections and layers. If you can master layers and then master how to actually select objects in Photoshop, then you've gone a long way into being able to modify and manipulate those images. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to actually create a new layer in this document. If you notice, we've got a photo bomber here in the background, and we're going to remove him from this background. So in your layers, so it looks like a couple of double sheets of paper there. If you click on that, it'll fly out, and then you can see the different layers that are in your document. Or if you don't see that, you can always go to Window, Layers, and you can see those layers. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a new blank layer. And we can either go to the upper right hand corner and create a new layer, or we can click on this little page right here and it'll create a new layer. And whatever layer is selected, we had background layer selected, and if you create a new layer in Photoshop, it'll automatically create that new layer right above that last selected layer. So now we've got a blank layer here, and if you notice, it's got kind of a checkerboard pattern in there. I'm going to hide this background layer, and you can see that checkerboard pattern. That's kind of the standard texture that you see when there is nothing there. So instead of being a white page, that checkerboard means that there isn't any content there. So you can tell this is a blank layer. Now what we're going to do is we're going to rename that layer, and if you're working in a complicated image, you may end up having 30 or 40 different layers organized in different folders, and the best way to keep track of what's happening on each layer is to give that layer a name. So if I click on it once and then click on the name again, it should, let's see if I can get it to do it, highlight that layer name, and we're going to call it No Photo Bomber. Okay, so now that we've got that, we've got our layer that we can work on. I'm going to make sure I've got the background layer selected, and then what we're going to do is we're going to work on isolating some areas in this image. Now there are lots of different ways you can select content on a Photoshop document. So over here on the upper left hand corner, you've got this rectangle marquee tool, so it can select this content, and if I have this area selected, that's the only content area that's going to be modified. And if you click and drag, you notice that there is an ellipsis, and then there's also a single line, so it'll actually one row of pixels there. There's also this lasso tool, so you can create kind of an organic shape, and anything, they call these the marching ants, anything that is inside that area is going to be modifiable. And just to kind of demonstrate that, I'm going to get the paintbrush tool here, and it's got a black fill, and if I click and drag across there, you notice that it's stopping right on that selection edge. Then if you click and hold on the lasso tool, there's the polygon lasso tool, so you can create something that has more of a geometric shape to it. You got to make sure and click back to join that. And then there's the magnetic lasso tool, and so what this does is it looks at the pixels and it tries to determine where you are wanting to select. So it notices that dark edge of her jacket. And so this one works okay. That might be an option to be able to select her. Then there is also this magic wand tool. And what the magic wand tool does is it looks at some pixels that are, so if you click on one pixel, it identifies pixels around there that are similar. So I clicked on a white pixel in the sky back here, and it selected most of those pixels in the background. And then what you can do is you can change the tolerance. So if you notice, the tolerance on mine is 32. So if I change it to 1, then it probably is going to only select only white pixels that are next to each other. And so the sky is kind of blown out with the color. It's all the same white color. The easiest way, and the way that we're going to use to select these areas, is to use the quick selection tool. And another thing that you'll want to get used to is selecting or deselecting. So right now I've got pixels selected. If I go to view, I want to go to select and then deselect, or Command D. I usually use the keystroke, so Command D, it will deselect all of those areas. So I'm going to use this quick selection tool, and I'm going to start to select these girls, because what we want to do is we want to isolate an area so that we don't mess with the pixels that are here. So the easiest way is to select these girls, and your brush might be larger than this, so what you want to do is you want to change the size of that brush so it's kind of an appropriate size to be able to select. So if yours is really large like this and you click and drag, it's going to select a whole large area. So the way you can change that size is here in this upper left-hand corner. You can see that there's a slider to be able to select it, or if you notice I didn't actually do that, this is a really handy quick key in Photoshop, is to use your left or right bracket. It's next to the P key on your keyboard. So the left bracket will make it smaller, the right bracket will make it larger. So I'm going to deselect here, and I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. And then if I click and drag across this girl's face, you can see it kind of snaps to the edge of where she's at. So we're going to select her. And then if you notice that there might be some parts that we don't want selected, so here it got some of the step, the cement behind her. And what we can do is if you hold the Option key down on the keyboard, you notice that it goes from a little plus sign to a minus sign. And what that will do is it'll allow you to add or subtract from that. So if I hold the Option down, I can subtract from this selection area. And it looks like we've got some other stuff here selected that we don't want. And then I want to start to select this girl over here. And if you notice, it's got a plus sign in there, and it will add to that area with that plus sign. So I can start to select this second girl here. And it got a little bit close to this guy in the background. And so I'm going to hold Option. And I hold the Shift key down, and that will start to add to an area. I hold the Option key, and you may want to make your brush a little bit smaller or larger. And really what we want to do is, it doesn't really matter the outside edges of the girls on the far right or far left where the hair is, because we're just going to be modifying this content in between them. So I'm going to hold the Shift key and then the Option key, and you can really get very particular about your selections. And again, that's part of mastering Photoshop, is mastering selections and getting really particular about them. But this will work for what we're wanting to do. Now, if we wanted to modify this guy here and erase him, right now the girls are selected, and we want to select the opposite. So just to demonstrate what is selected, I'm going to get my paintbrush again and click and drag across here. So if you notice, I'm only able to modify where those girls are. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to undo that. And what we need to do is we need to inverse that selection. So we need to select everything but what is already selected. And if you go to Select, and then about four down is Inverse. And so now what it did is, it doesn't look any different really, because all it did was it is thinking about the stuff on the opposite of that. But if you notice, there is some marching ants around the outside edge of the page here where they weren't before. Now if I click and drag across, you can see that it's only modifying things that aren't where those girls are, because we inversed the selection. So once you get these this selection made, then what we can do is we can work on changing or removing this person from the picture. And what we're going to do is we're going to use what's known as the clone stamp tool. And this is a really popular tool to be able to take a selection of an area and take that content, instead of having it filled with black or something like that, we can duplicate part of a photograph. And it's one of the most common ways that people modify images. So if we go here just under the paintbrush, this is the clone stamp tool. And when you select that, it's going to actually change these settings up here at the top. And these settings up at the top, you can change the brush, and I think in the suggestions here, the suggestion is to make the brush a certain hardness or size, so 90 maybe. You can feather that edge. You can and part of what the feathering of that edge would be a little bit more detailed or soft edge to what your brush is gonna do. And I challenge you to just to experiment with that to see how that works for you. The other thing that we need to make sure and do is that we need to sample all layers. So right here, the default I believe is current layer. And what this does, the clone stamp tool, just to kind of show you what happens, is if I've got my background layer selected and I sample something, and so this is going to be a little bit of a dramatic sample here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and I want to copy this right here into an area, a different area. And so you can see what size my brush is. If I hold the Option key down, it changes my cursor into a little target. And that's the area that I'm going to be selecting. So I have to go to where that area is, and I have to hold the Option key down and click. And then if I go right next here, you can see those pixels are being duplicated right here. And so then if I click and drag, it makes a change and it actually duplicates those pixels right next to here. And it's kind of hard to see on my computer, but you'll notice over there on the left hand side there's the target. Those are the pixels that it's copying. Now I'm going to undo this, because what happened right now is, because I'm on the background layer, it actually made a destructive change to my background layer. So instead of, because now that if I clicked on something else, this has actually become a part of my pixels, and it's ruined that background layer. So I'm going to undo that, and I'm going to show you the difference between a destructive or non-destructive change. And so what we want to do is, we were working on that current layer, and the sample we took was from this background layer. Now if we change this to all layers, then what I can do is I can go to this blank layer we made in the very beginning, and then I can still go over here and I can sample this area here. So I'm going to Option click here. And then if I come over here and I click and drag across this area, then what it does is it will copy those pixels onto this layer instead of onto the background layer. So then if you notice, I can hide that layer and show that layer. So it's a non-destructive change. So if I hide this background layer, you'll notice that it's only in that one area. And the power of that is that I can move those pixels around after the fact, and they're not flattened to that background layer. So what I'm going to do is undo that. And what we're going to do is we're going to find something that's not distracting and copy those pixels to Photoshop over this guy here. And so this cityscape right here might be generic enough. Maybe if you know New York, maybe it's not. But what we're going to do is we're going to sample right here. So I'm going to Option click on this skyline, maybe make it a little bit larger. Option click there. And I'm going to come back over in this area, and I'm just going to click and drag. And if you notice, it's copying that skyline, and it's not modifying the pixels where those girls are because those parts aren't selected. And then we can go down into this area and we've removed that person in the background. And so you may want to get in here a little bit closer. Maybe what you want to do is, if you notice some of the hair got selected there, you can make this a little bit smaller and do an option click here for some of this texture. Maybe you want to use the eraser tool and smooth some of those shapes out. That was kind of a rough selection. And then if you notice, this is kind of one of those telltale signs that something has been photoshopped, is that duplication, but that's okay for this assignment, is to duplicate those over. But now what I can do is I can turn this on and off, and I can go back to my original layer that has not been modified, and then I can have this layer which I'm able to turn off and on if I want to go back to the original content. So I'm going to hit Command D to deselect. And if you notice, with this layer selected, if I get my move tool, which is this very top tool, and I click and drag, it'll move that area. So you can kind of see how those layers work. So I'm going to do Command Z so it moves back. And so once you get that guy in the background photoshopped out, then what I want you to do is save this as a PSD file, which is a native file for Photoshop. So I'm going to do Save As. And then in the drop down, the top one is Photoshop, and it'll make it a PSD file. And what this will do is it will maintain the layers so I can see the layers in your file. And then also save this as a JPEG file and add your name to it maybe. And then that's going to actually flatten it so I don't see the layers. So I need to see both the layered and the non-layered version. And hit save, leave it at the maximum, and hit OK, and then upload both of those files to Canvas. And there is another video on selecting and the clone tool in the other digital tool videos. Hopefully that gives you some insight on how to complete this assignment. Thanks.